So a few months ago, I was a little overwhelmed with work and life and just decided that I wanted to get away to somewhere warm, somewhere on a beach, and literally planned a trip for 6 days before I departed. I basically looked at flights and saw which flight was going to get me to somewhere warm the cheapest and found a flight to Puerto Rico. Once I found my flight, I actually went back and found an Airbnb. The Airbnb was actually in Luquillo, so I stayed this is probably like a 50-minute drive from the San Juan airport. Even though it was last minute, I still got to do a little bit of research on some things that I wanted to do while I was there. And one of the things that I was most excited for was taking a ferry from Ceiba, which is in Puerto Rico's mainland, to Culebra, to their famous Flamenco Beach. Ceiba was about 25 to 30 minutes away from my Airbnb in Luquillo, and I'll tag my Airbnb because I absolutely loved it. It was beachfront. It was absolutely gorgeous. One thing that really drove me to this ferry ride is that it was supposed to be very quick, so like a 45-minute to an hour ferry ride, and it was only $8.50 round trip. Now let me just tell y'all, I had heard mixed reviews about this ferry ride to Culebra, and I'd heard some good things, some bad things. It ended up being an hour and 20 minutes, so don't be fooled by the 45 minutes. And stay with me, we'll get more into what that ferry ride actually was like. So once we docked at Culebra, Lord, everybody was so excited that we actually had made it. It was not the easiest ride, but it was a little overwhelming how many taxis there were all in one space, all trying to sell to you. So it definitely reminded me of a cruise port. I had done my research, so me and some other people that I met while I was waiting for the ferry paid $5 each to be able to take us from the port where we landed in Culebra to Flamenco Beach. It was only a 15 to 20 minute ride from the port to the beach. They definitely were pedal to the metal, but we got there safely. Once we got there, it was more so like a park ground. We did have to walk a little ways until we got to a gate. The fee to get into the beach was only $2 per person, so this really was an affordable trip through and through. I was absolutely geeking over the speckled chickens. I'm a biology teacher and we teach about them, but I actually had never seen one before. When we got there though, no sign of beach, just chickens and cats everywhere. There were some kiosks, which I definitely was going to come back to, but I definitely had to go and see the beach first before I went to get my food. Like when you go to the airport, got to go find your terminal, then you can go off and find your food. So same thing. So this day that we came, there was only a couple kiosks open, maybe like 3, and there wasn't a place open to rent chairs, so I wasn't expecting for that place to be closed. Also, the gatekeeper that was taking money at the gate warned us not to get into the water because the waves were so strong when we got there. And honestly, my whole trip that I was in Puerto Rico, every beach that I went to, the waves were really, really strong except for Seven Seas Beach. I think it was a weather type of thing. I was also told that the water was not as clear because of the weather, but I still thought that it was absolutely beautiful. Later on in the video, I do have some close-ups where I'm just sitting on the beach and eating my food, and you'll see exactly how strong those waves are. And there were actually people that ended up getting in there. Like, I commend them because the waves were really, really strong. So the only bad part about when I booked this trip was that when I booked it, it looked like the weather was going to be clear. Then as a couple days went by, once we got to 2 or 3 days before the trip, it said that it was supposed to storm every single day that I was in Puerto Rico. So I was so upset. I really thought it was going to be storming every day. I wouldn't get to relax by the beach. But honestly, the weather held pretty well. We'll talk more about later when the weather does not hold as well. But this was so much better than it storming day in, day out every day while I was here. So definitely was very thankful that it held out enough for me to even get onto the beach. Culebra is very much a naturalistic area, so there are not any high rises or big resorts. So natural appeal is definitely a priority here. It was very foresty getting here, like getting to the beach itself, getting to the park itself was very foresty. Once I did get there though, I did end up going back to get my food. I ended up trying 2 different kiosks. The first one was not so great and I paid $26 for it, so definitely was a little disappointed. Then I went back to a kiosk number 1 that's on the left-hand side, paid $28 and got me some tacos. I think for $28, I got me a plate of tacos, a bottle of soda, and a drink. Y'all, the tacos were absolutely perfect. I was very happy with my tacos. So I had eaten before I left to go to Ceiba. I was supposed to get to the terminal at 1. I got there a little before 1. We didn't leave until 2, and it was an hour and 20-minute ferry ride. Then we had to take the taxi over to the beach, so I was just a little hungry. Right here, I just wanted to show you guys exactly how strong those waves are. Like, it was actually blowing my mind that the waves were building up walls. Like, I probably should have gotten closer so you can actually see, but it was absolutely insane. I've never seen this so strong in my entire life on the shore. So I did want to go more into my ferry ride experience. So again, the ferry ride, I think I paid $8.50 for a round trip, which is not bad whatsoever. It's actually even cheaper for residents of Puerto Rico. The trip by itself was about $4.50 per person, and then I had to pay to bring my backpack. So anything that you brought along with you did have to pay for. So my backpack was $2, And then I think there was a $2 environmental fee. So we ended up with like $8.50, which is insane for a whole ferry ride to a secluded island. Like I was really, really excited about that. There were actually two different places that the ferries could take you. You could either go to Culebra, which is what I did, or you could go to Vieques, which was also relatively cheap. And a lot more people would go and actually spend the night at Vieques. So it was common to see people with suitcases and just all their belongings because they were planning on staying in one of the hotels that was actually on the island. There were actually two ways that you could get onto this island, and that was by the ferry or by seaplane. One thing I will say is to make sure you get there at least 1 hour before your departure time. I did hear about a couple who got to Culebra early in the morning, so they were going to head out around 12, but they missed their departure time window and they had to wait until 8 p.m. So make sure you are paying attention to when your departure time is, when you have to arrive. Otherwise, you risk having to wait hours to be able to get back to the mainland Puerto Rico. Since I booked last minute, this is something that is very popular. It's a popular attraction and excursion when you're in Puerto Rico. So the times were very limited. I actually ended up getting the last return time. So I definitely was not playing with getting back to the mainland. So I will say this is not something that you can really just up and do when you're in Puerto Rico for the most part. It's something that you actually have to have planned. Otherwise, there won't be space for you to be able to get your ticket. And buying a ticket at the port is not the most reliable thing to do. So I had heard some different things about the ferry ride itself, and some people said it wasn't a big deal. Some people said that it was real bumpy. And it started out okay. So for the first 45 minutes, like it wasn't a big deal. Like we were kind of just chilling. Everybody's taking videos. A lot of people were standing at the rails just watching. I was very grateful that they had an outdoor area. It kind of was a little tucked away, so we had to find it. But I'm very grateful that we found it, and I was actually able to spend that ride on the way over it. Outside, I think that really did help some, but about 40 minutes into the ride, we got a little choppy. And I could tell that the person who was actually driving the boat was trying to make sure that people didn't get sick, because I could hear him slow down when we would get too bumpy and too choppy, but still it ended up being pretty rough. So right around the time that it did start to get bumpy, there was a worker that brought around barf bags, which is usually not a good sign. Luckily, nobody in the upstairs outside portion needed it, but there were some people in the inside that did, so he did bring those back into the inside and pass those out to the passengers. Unfortunately for us, it was raining when we left, so we did have to stay in the inside, and it was not a fun time. So again, it took an hour and 20 minutes for us to actually get to the island from Ceiba. So if it started at 40 minutes that we started feeling bumpy, that was 40 minutes of us having to endure a extremely bumpy ride. Definitely was not anticipating that bad. One of the things that I did hear about when I was planning my trip to Culebra was about the tanks that can be found on the beach in Flamenco Beach. There are two different tanks that have been graffitied over. So just to give you a little backstory, so the U.S. took control over Puerto Rico in around 1898 after the Spanish-American War, and by 1901 they had established a Navy base in Culebra. For decades, the U.S. Navy used this as a bombing range and a training ground, which caused some of the residents to have to be relocated. So like I mentioned earlier, locals really do take environmental health very seriously here. And in the 1970s, the locals began to protest the presence of the Navy base here. When the U.S. Navy departed in 1975, they left the tanks on the island, and the locals turned it into a powerful symbol of resistance, history, and local culture. These landmarks were only about a 5 to 10 minute walk down the beach from the entrance. Since then, it has been graffitied on, and it's a local landmark, so when people visit Flamenco Beach, this is a popular place for them to walk down the beach and to see. So there are actually two different tanks. There is the one that is in the water, and then there's one that's actually colored in a lot of yellow and green in a Puerto Rican flag, which you'll see shortly. I honestly was really grateful that I got to take this trip over to Culebra, being that this is something that I planned last minute. I was really nervous that there wouldn't be any tickets left for me to be able to actually come onto the island, to the ferry to the island. So I was really grateful for that. One of the most important things or pieces of advice that I have to give you before you come to Culebra is make sure you bring your bug spray, especially once it gets closer to sundown. The mosquitoes are absolutely atrocious. I think I was having so much fun that I didn't really realize it until it got actually pretty dark. Other thing that I was not expecting here is that there are a lot of crabs. Again, they come out a lot at nighttime too when the sun has gone down, But the thing about the crabs on this beach is that they were blonde, so they blended in with the sand. So that was definitely a little nerve-wracking. I do hope that next time, if I come back again, I'm able to get here earlier so that I can actually see the beach during the daytime. Hopefully not during a stormy time, so I can actually see it at its fullest potential. But I thought that it was absolutely beautiful. But according to the locals, like I said, the water is typically even prettier, which I'm just absolutely astounded. I also just want to say that everybody I met was so friendly. I definitely felt safe traveling here solo. This was actually a pretty loaded day because I actually, the morning of, went to Seven Seas Beach. I was supposed to go and to watch the sunrise, but honestly, I was on a solo trip and was prioritizing rest, so I didn't actually see the sunrise. But I did go to Seven Seas Beach around 9 a.m. I hung out there for a couple hours. It started out pretty empty, and then eventually people started coming, and it ended up getting a little packed, and that's when I headed back to my hotel to get showered to come on the trip to Culebra. So right now you can see me coming up to the second tank that I thought was absolutely beautiful. It is colored in mostly yellow and green, and then it has a Puerto Rican flag up there. And it was honestly just really empowering to see how people were able to stand up for their land and stand up for what they believed in, to take care of their land and the place that they lived and loved. So I think it's a really symbolic mark of what we can do when we stand together. So I just thought it was really, really awesome. One of the people who are local actually did tell me what the dancing people on the side of the machine meant. I can't remember right now, so if you're somebody that knows, please let me know down below, because I was really interested in learning the history. Afterwards, we headed back to the port and got absolutely soaked, so the rain did come, so we actually had to be inside the ship on the way back to the port, and it was extremely rocky. I think it took an hour and 45 minutes to get back to the actual port. So basically, people threw up all the way home. We had to walk once we got to the port back to our parking lot because there were so many people coming back at the last minute. It would have taken forever to take the shuttle. Once we got back, it was like an hour of a wait to get out of the actual parking lot to pay to get out. It was $15. So overall, it was a beautiful trip, but it was absolutely exhausting. So definitely take that into account if you're planning on bringing small children with you. This is Travel with Rakaya. Follow me for more.